As we've covered time and time again on this channel, radiation is nothing to mess around with. We've talked about what can happen when an accident causes a nuclear reaction, and it's a pain I wouldn't wish on anyone. It takes a split second, and sometimes the accident is extremely avoidable. Today, we'll talk about a scientist who got a little too risky for his own good. Let's discuss what happened to Louis Slotin. Louis Slotin was born in Winnipeg, Canada in 1910. He grew up in the North End neighborhood of Winnipeg, Manitoba, and even at a young age, he knew what he wanted to do with life. At 16, he entered the University of Manitoba to obtain a degree in science, in that time receiving a university gold medal in both physics and chemistry. By 1933, he had a master's, and with the assistance of one of his mentors, he obtained a fellowship to study at King's College London. While there, he took up amateur boxing and even won the college's amateur boxing championship. By 1936, he'd gotten a PhD in physical chemistry. It seemed there was nothing this man couldn't do if he put his mind to it. Around 1942, Louis started to take an interest in radiobiology. His expertise on the subject even gained the attention of the United States government, and as a result was invited to join the Manhattan Project, a top-secret World War II government project in which the US was trying to rush to create the first nuclear bomb before Germany. This interest had him move to the US to work with uranium and bomb physics at Los Alamos, New Mexico in 1944. While at Los Alamos, Louis began working with dangerous critical testing, first with uranium, then plutonium. This was where his experiments started to get exceedingly risky, as they were described by his peers as tickling the tail of a sleeping dragon. He had a reputation of flirting with a nuclear disaster, as he'd bring masses of fissile material to near-critical levels to establish their near-critical values. He was treating himself and the people around him like lab rats with the level of risk he was taking, and while he was a well-established professional, it was only a matter of time before that kind of cockiness backfired. On August 21, 1945, Louis would experience a critical tragedy when his lab assistant, Harry Doglin, had handled a heavy brick of pressed powder known as tungsten carbide. Tungsten carbide is a gray powder that is twice as stiff and dense as steel. It's often used to make ammunition, hiking poles, surgical instruments, jewelry, and cutting tools like drill bits. It also has the ability to cause a nuclear reaction when coming into contact with plutonium, and unfortunately, that's just what Harry did. The bomb Harry and Louis had been working on had a 14-pound core of plutonium-gallium alloy. When he approached, Harry accidentally dropped the brick of tungsten carbide onto it and caused an immediate reaction that doused him in neutron radiation. It was later suggested that Harry hadn't received a lethal dose of radiation, but then he proceeded to dismantle the experiment, giving him additional delayed gamma radiation and beta burns. He collapsed soon after, and 25 days later died from acute radiation poisoning. This accident would be a warning to Louis that while he was comfortable with the dangerous materials he was working with, one wrong move could easily end his life. On May 21, 1946, not even a year after the accident, Louis would have a critical accident of his own. At this point, he was one of the few people who could assemble a nuclear bomb, and his teachings were needed at Los Alamos. So, on that day, he was demonstrating for 7 colleagues to explain how the first stages of fusion reactors worked. To do so, he placed 2 half-spheres of beryllium around a plutonium core, the very same core that had so recently killed Harry. Louis held onto the upper beryllium half with his left hand and carefully stuck a screwdriver between this and the lower half to keep them separated. This, of course, was not standard procedure and an example of some of the risky behavior he involved in his experiments. Normally, there are shims or wedges of material used to keep the 2 halves separated, but for whatever reason, Louis had upped the ante with a simple screwdriver. You might already know what's going to happen. At 3:20 p.m., the screwdriver slipped, causing the top shell to fall and cause a brief burst of hard radiation. Everyone in the room witnessed a blue glow and a wave of heat from the accident and immediately knew this was horrific. Lewis experienced a sour taste in his mouth and an intense burning in the hand holding the beryllium. Quickly, he lifted the shell half and dropped it on the floor, but the damage was already done. Upon leaving the lab, Lewis immediately threw up, and his peers rushed him to the hospital. 4 of the 7 men who were observing the experiment were also hospitalized, but were discarded 4 days later. The student closest to Lewis was in the hospital for several weeks with a lesser severe but still pretty bad case of radiation poisoning. Lewis had not been so lucky, as despite receiving extensive medical care and blood transfusions, his condition was incurable. By the 5th day after the accident, his health was rapidly deteriorating, displaying signs of severe radiation poisoning, including diarrhea, reduced urine output, swollen hands, arrhythmia, blisters on his hands and forearms, intestinal paralysis, and gangrene. Internally, he had radiation burns spread throughout, described by one medical expert as a 3-dimensional sunburn. By day 7, he was having trouble breathing and had to be put in an oxygen tent, gaining mental confusion as well. By May 30th, just 9 days after the accident, Lewis experienced a total disintegration of all bodily functions and fell into a coma before he promptly passed away. The core responsible for Lewis and Harry's death was labeled the Demon Core and proved to be way more radioactive than they thought it would be. It was later melted down and used in another core. After the accident, Los Alamos discontinued all hands-on critical assembly work, requiring all future work to be done remotely with the use of robotics. This story is a strange look back at how we used to handle very dangerous materials, and proves that no matter how experienced you are, mistakes can cause a quick end for everybody involved. Thanks for watching. For more true crime and horror, please consider subscribing. Game with me on Twitch, follow me on Twitter, and as always, be well.